We're now live on YouTube with the January 30th meeting of the Node.js modules team. We have quorum here, which is always exciting to me. And we're going to just jump right into things because we've got a jam-packed agenda. First off, Jeffrey has an announcement to make. Jeffrey?
I wanted to get started on tackling the other entry point cases like --eval, standard in, extensionless files, etc. So if anyone who's interested in participating in that could, I guess, let me know, and I could put together the list of people, and we can start having meetings about it.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there anyone else with anything to add to that? And if anyone could take notes, that would be greatly appreciated. And yeah, don't forget to add your name to the attendance as well. I'll drop a link in the chat. Okay, so the next thing that we have on the agenda is a 5-minute time box to talk about the Slack channel. Perhaps we can get this done in less time. And Daniel has just joined me over here. Maybe I could turn on the video and you could see us both. That'll be fun.
Need a note taker?
We do need a note taker, but all right, Daniel's going to grab his computer.
Right back.
So Slack channel, I believe that, Jeffrey, were you the one who opened the issue on this? If you're speaking, you're muted.
Yeah, I think I resolved all of everyone's feedback on it. So is there any reason not to merge this in?
So just double checking the current state of it, because I think from objections on it were myself and Gus. So the text now says there are several public places where the modules group has been discussing their work, the issues, the Node.js Slack channel. So, I mean, this still makes it sound like it's an official place for discussions in the group, which is what my initial objections were to having it there.
Okay, I mean, I thought that was addressed, but if you want, we can, we can just take this offline and deal with it between the meetings if you want. I don't think it's worth taking meeting time.
Okay, sounds good to me. We've got a hand up from Saleh.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so I think I'll just raise the issue of the board that we tried to organize our efforts with. I think we're just missing a common place where people conduct work. So
I think this is off topic for the current topic, and because we have so much.
No, like it's actually related to the Slack. I'll come to that in a sec. I think we can avoid trying to organize everything on a board if we have an official place where people conduct these discussions, so that if somebody's coming in and they want to talk about a particular topic, we can have a dedicated place where these discussions take place. They can just go there. That will negate the need for a board altogether, because, yeah, that's it, I guess.
Okay, let's just move this offline then and get to the next agenda item unless anyone has anything else to add. Okay, so the next item that we have is dynamic module development in Node.js. And followed by that is also the minimum to release. I think these are kind of interspersed. Does anyone have an opinion on the order of these two? Stick with the order we currently have. Okay, cool. So dynamic modules. Guy, do you want to give us an update on the discussion that happened earlier this morning at TC39?
Since you're there live from TC39, maybe you can give us your opinion, or or shall I just? Yeah.
My concern is that you have a much deeper understanding of what's going on there, so I don't want to mischaracterize anything.
No, sure. I think yeah, it's a shame we don't have Bradley here as well, or an official reference on the notes, but and I guess we presented the current layering proposal with the restriction of removing basically throwing in the export star from CommonJS or export star from dynamic module case, which was discussed at the last TC39. So, oh, there he is. Okay.
We were just giving you what happened in the meeting.
So Bradley, please do help clarify if I'm missing anything here. Bradley went through the briefly the Node.js specification, briefly how the API change works in the TC39 spec proposal, and it's like a 20 or 30 line change, and just went through it. There was some resistance, I think, from Till originally. He had some difficult questions, and Adam as well. And there was some concern around if dynamic modules are loosening invariance. Bradley can update on the exact argument there. But what I got from it was a sort of a general concern around if this kind of spirals and leads to it being used in other scenarios other than Node.js's usage of CommonJS modules. The fact that we're allowing this this kind of loosening of one of the invariants in modules. And then there was also some resistance to having the export star restriction. So in general, there was quite a lot of resistance. And this was a meeting where the goal for us as a group would have been to have, it's the 5th time it's been presented to TC39. Since ES 2015, this exact topic has been discussed many times over the years. There have been promises from TC39 in the past to develop specifications along these directions. Originally, Carity worked on a proposal formally that did exactly something similar when it was agreed at a previous meeting that these sort of directions should be pursued. And so the general feeling is that there isn't necessarily anything further that we can do to present it. There's no implementation feedback. I mean, there's potentially a way that we could guard the spec to say this only happens for CommonJS and not for other types of module systems, and it's not going to be poisoning other things. But there was a degree of resistance there, and we didn't get a nice clean yes that would have been ideal for us to then say let's move forward with implementation. So here we are, coming up to 4 years since ES modules landed, and Node still doesn't really have a clear indication from TC39 what we can do there. So I don't know if you want to update Bradley if I missed anything, or have you had further discussions around that?
I think there were some people who were unable to attend that were being represented as well. Alan Worth Brock is opposed to modifying source text module record, as well as Till and Adam, as is Dominic DiNicola. They did not actually object due to lack of attendance, but they do have concerns raised on GitHub. I think the forbids clause was a way for us to explicitly remove some discussion that was being had on it leaking to other locations. And that's something we can do to alleviate that. However, Alan's concern is more general with modifying source text module record at all, and it being designed a specific way. Dominic's is different. He wants source text module records moved to the web spec and feels that Node can ship our own non-standard module system entirely. So that's all I've got to say.
Well, technically, it's just a different standard. It'll be in the web.
But I don't think, at least from my impression in the meeting, that there was explicit interest in going in that direction. That seemed like it would be controversial as well.
No, people don't want.
Correct.
People don't want bifurcation.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
Was okay with.
And so, I mean, my takeaway from like a really, really high level was it just feels like this isn't happening today. It isn't happening quickly. If it ever did happen, you know, individuals were definitely like supportive of finding time and doing breakouts to try to do it. But I think that this is like, you know, we went in November and like we've gone before, and this is, as Guy has put, has been presented multiple times, and it is controversial with different parties for different reasons. And at least to myself and for those who are on the call, please interject if you think that I'm being too harsh here. It does not feel like it will happen. Would that be an accurate?
So I don't know why, but I have a sunnier disposition. And I thought that there was some movement on if they could restrict these cases to node specific, though there was a concern about setting a precedent for that, because then other runtimes or environments could say like, well, we're just going to add this node for being our runtime specific. But for some reason, I marked that down as a possible way forward, like if we got buy-in from Till and the others. But it certainly is a very narrow path for sure.
Daniel has his hand up in our room here.
That was JDP, right? Yeah, I actually agree on that point. The thing I took from that meeting was there are concerns about people, different implementers using it for different browser implementations, but that's not necessarily, as long as that can be prevented, they feel okay with it. That's how I took that. And so it sounded like people responded fairly positively to some sort of restricted, like Annex B sort of thing, maybe. I don't necessarily know, but like some sort of one-time exception to it. But that's how I read into it as well.
Okay, so that's a different read on it than I had. I guess I was just like hyper-focused on people being pretty explicit about not wanting any changes to the source text module record, and I don't know how you rectify those two things.
I mean, I think there was sort of this dual maybe conversation that was happening as well. Like there was a focus on that for a bit, but it sounded like people were basically thinking that there is a way forward. Like people wanted to somehow support Node. They didn't necessarily know whether or not this was the approach maybe, but they were certain, like, if we need to make a change, like we'd be willing to make an exception just for Node, which is what it was, but not for any other runtime. That's how I had read into it. Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, and who, like, but I guess like, and maybe this is something that I can take up with Dominic or some of the other stakeholders. I just kind of like, I feel like that may appease some people, but I'm not sure that was like the entire room.
Right.
So we forgot Ben Newman from Meteor.
Yeah.
Was objecting on the grounds that he found it to be incomplete for his desire of interoperability due to export star missing.
I talked to him offline about it, and it seemed more flexible on it, but it's just like, it seems like there's at least 3 or 4 different objections that we need to follow up with to get this through. And I guess like the flip side of it, and I'm not trying to be unreasonably negative, and I'm not giving up, but it's just like, I don't know how we feasibly do this in a time frame that has us shipping anytime in the near future. I guess in theory, we could decide, and maybe this is something that we could talk about today, but maybe we could decide to move forward with the assumption that we can have some sort of solution in this space before April, because there's another meeting in March and we have time to do it, with like the caveat that if we're unable to get consensus by March meeting, that we are all on the same page about what the alternative path would be. I think that seems potentially like the best path to go that doesn't block progress today. So we have some hands up. Saleh?
Yeah, I was actually going to say exactly that. Like, I'm wondering if we should explore a way to accomplish this in parallel with pure JavaScript. I know it's not going to be clean, but to have a parallel approach where we can use the same API to use the dynamic module when it lands, or to defer to a JavaScript polyfill, if you like, that would do the same. Would that be something that other people are open to?
I don't think that the problem is an implementation standpoint. You know, Guy, you can chime in really quickly, but like, I don't think the problem is our inability to implement it. I think it's the inability to implement it in a way that is adherent to the specification. So I don't think we need to be looking at JavaScript shims personally.
If I can mention as well, I did consider another option, which was, you know, if we could possibly float a patch in Node that added the support for it, effectively like a, you know, a patch to V8. And I did discuss that briefly with Michael. From what it sounds like, that's not something that's been done before, or that has much kind of, you know, Node doesn't typically add its own functionality to V8. And especially when there's so much activity happening on V8, keeping that kind of a change up to date might be an issue. But if there were a path, you know, that was another option I was thinking of.
Okay, Jeffrey has his hand up.
I was just gonna say, in regards to the import file specifier proposal, if we think that there's a chance that we might get named exports from CommonJS and/or CommonJS interop in some form that we would be willing to ship in the future at all, then we kind of have to design for that. Like, we can't just decide, oh, we're never going to have interop, so therefore we don't need all the complexity of like managing different types of packages and blah, blah, blah. So we can talk about this more when we get to that part of the proposal, but just wanted to like see, like, is that what, am I reading you correctly, that like maybe this won't ship soon, but there's a chance that whatever, in a year or something, this might all get figured out?
I don't think it's a timeline of a year. I think at this point, like, it's really like, I would say March would be the go, no go. Like, we have another meeting. It's before the Node 12 cut. We've come back and forth multiple times, and each time there's people giving pushback. So I think that if we can't, in 2 months, alleviate concerns that committee members have, I think we need to move forward, assuming that this is not going to happen. But I'm happy for other people to state that they don't like that timeline.
Just to clarify a little bit for Jeff's point, if we do want to seek this after we ship something, we still do need to carve out the design space for it. So a good example of this is if we ship some form of CommonJS interop, we are locking ourselves into a design space. So like, just being able to import CommonJS would also be a way to shut down this potential path forward if you want to do it separately, because you've locked into a form of interop. Whereas, like, if you always threw, if you never allowed yourself to import CommonJS, I mean, we could come up with anything in the future if we want to pursue it in TC39 for a few more years.
So kind of like following up on that, like, in theory, we could do something from the IRP proposal that allows you to specify the type of the module, but not use that to change how the loader itself works. So we would carve out the design space that, like, that mechanism is there, and then not have interop, but work towards interop if we eventually were able to fix the dynamic module stuff. Right. Let's talk about that during the IRP proposal.
Like the proposal would be as it is now. It's just that when you tried to import CommonJS, it would throw for now, and then we decide if at some point we remove that restriction. You know.
Yeah. Guy, you've got your hands up. Let's go through these 3 questions, and then Guy, GDD, and LJ Hart, and we'll.
I actually already stated my point. Sorry, I forgot to put my hand up.
Okay, no problem. JD.
Hi. Yes. So you said we have to have something by the end of March for April. What does the future look like if we don't have this? What are the options left?
I would suggest that we punt that discussion to the next topic, which is shipping criteria. So let's follow up with that in the next agenda item if you're okay with that.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Jordan?
This is probably going to be punted to the next topic, but I don't want to make, I think it would be a big mistake to make any shipping decisions whatsoever based on any form of timeline or desire to go quickly. I think we should ship the right thing or nothing. And what that is still undetermined. But I think iteratively working on things is a good approach for APIs. But for things like this that affect the ecosystem, I don't think it is safe to iterate on, because people will, whatever we ship, people will build something off of, and that will lock us in. Like, that will close down avenues of exploration because we won't want to break the ecosystem. So that can play into shipping criteria, I suppose.
So let's jump right into the next agenda item. Thank you, everyone, for digging into this. And then just so I see where we're at for time, we have two more things, or we have three more items. And I guess it's the minimum to release, the IRP type dynamic modules, and the specifier proposal. Should have just enough time to hopefully get into most of them. So let's kick off this talking about releases. So kind of going through timelines here of a preferred timeline, independent of exactly how we do it. A way in which I've envisioned it is we cut Node 12 in April. And so what that means is any Semver major changes to the node loader that we want to do, that's kind of like, we're actually at a closer timeline to around like early to mid-March for that, because there's a Semver major cutoff period. So we can kind of look at mid-March as being the timeline for cutting off Semver majors. And at the moment, I actually think the only proposal that we have that would maybe be Semver major would be the package.export stuff, because that would I think that would have to land as Semver major if we wanted to include it in the CommonJS loader. But that's a whole other thing for us to explore separately, but that's just something to have in the back of your mind about like 412, the main thing that would block it. What I would love to see us have as a timeline, independent of anything else, is we have the minimal kernel, we're starting to expand it with different things. I would love us to ship our next iteration of the implementation behind a flag with 12, with the intention of removing that flag before October when 12 goes to LTS. For what it's worth, we also have prior art of shipping things and removing the flag during LTS. We did that with the HTTP2. We also did that with NAPI, and we even did that late in LTS when necessary. But the more churn that there is, the more things that it touches, the more changes that there are, the harder that becomes to do. So something like HTTP2 or NAPI that had the flags removed in LTS, it was more of a stability thing than a design space thing. Like HTTP2 was mostly designed and mostly done. It just wasn't agreed to be stable yet. So, you know, these are kind of some of the things that are coming in the timelines that I think are worth considering. And to the point that Jordan had raised before that we punted on about design space and about, you know, timing on all this, I'm kind of the opinion at this point that we need to ship something. And I understand, Jordan, that where you're coming from on we need to design this right and take the time to do it right. We said that a year ago, we said that 2 years ago, we said that 3 years ago. And I think that we are in decision paralysis, and that we will perpetually be in decision paralysis because we have a group with different ideals, goals, which is fine. We'll all find a way to sort that out. But, you know, the joke I've been making lately is, you know, we wanted to avoid a Python 2, Python 3 situation. And in the time that we haven't made a decision, Python has almost fixed their ecosystem. And so we can debate the semantics of that. But what I mean is, yes, making the wrong decision can be disastrous for our ecosystem. I think our indecision has been just as disastrous. And continuing to be stuck in this mode of not making decisions, I actually think is potentially worse for Node than making a decision that's not perfect. And I think, and maybe we can have consensus around this as a group so that it's not needing to be super contentious, that potentially we just need to identify like the handful of things that we need to just make decisions on. And as a group decide that we'll vote on them under the, you know, respectful decision that all of us understand that we won't probably be able to reach consensus on these, that they are hard decisions and based on philosophical differences, and that we as a group need to just maybe vote on them, and then all as a group accept the results of those votes and work towards a solution. So one example of this could be, as a straw, would be we work towards shipping transparent interop in April with named exports. But if we cannot get named exports, we do not ship transparent interop, and we do it in such a way that throws so that the design space is still able to be explored so that we can land it later if dynamic modules can ever happen according to the spec. And I think like these kinds of approaches are nice because it's saying, hey, like the people who don't like, who don't want transparent interop are able to concede if we're able to do it really, really well. But if we have to make concessions, then the people who want transparent interop are willing to concede to allow us to move forward in a way that can ship and have the design space open. I think the other ones that we'd have to explore there would definitely be file extensions would be a big one. And the IRP type proposal, I think we're close to like consensus on that. I think we could strip some of the, like we could have kind of two different paths that could go. Anyways, I'm blabbing. I will stop and I'll concede to the other people with their hands up. But if people don't object, I almost feel like at this point, the only way we're going to ship on time is by just identifying these things that we don't have consensus on, doing a vote on it, and just all respecting the results of that and moving forward as a group to design the best thing that we can within those constraints. Saleh, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I think we're all sharing a lot of what you said. I guess what I'm trying to say at this point, or my concern at this point, sorry, is that we are trying to ship, a couple of months from now or so, and it's going to be not the full implementation. So my concern as someone who is using Node's experimental modules to grow with Node as Node implements modules is midway through. I'd like, yes, new features to come in, but I would like to also find a way to transition everything I've been working on to explore modules as Node is actually releasing the experimentals. Like, it's a concern. It's not a make or break, but it would be nice if we can keep in mind that if we're still really at releasing something that is flagged, it should not really be reset to anyone who's experimenting with the flagged implementation that exists in the wild. It could be very different, but at least it shouldn't take away features that they might have built some experimental projects on. I guess that's it.
Okay, does anyone have a direct response to Saleh right now?
Yes.
JD? And then
Sure. Experimental is no warranty, no guarantee. We can't be held to that. Like, if there's so many, every time I see someone say like they want to use experimental modules in productions, I give them a 2-paragraph long disclaimer of text that says like, not a good idea. We're not going to support that. It's not part of the servicing, as far as I know, for experimental features. Cool, that's it.
It comes without warranty, and we can do big breaking changes. I mean, this is part of the reason we should try to land it in 12, because we want to minimize the amount of big breaking changes for people, but we can. Gus?
Yeah, sorry, can I just say one last thing? So yeah, like I don't mind if it's very breaking, as long as it doesn't take away, the full support of CJS all of a sudden. That's what I'm not saying that experimental is, somebody experimenting in production or all these cases that we know have come with no warranty. But I'm just talking about, like, if you take away a lot of features, that is a concern. It's not being, a blocking thing at the moment. Just a concern I'm raising.
Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, so I was responding to Salah's point, but also Mouse to what you were saying. What are the actual breaking changes? Because anything under experimental, as we were just saying, I think is not considered. I do not consider that breaking. I actually think we do want to break people relying on it, because they need to learn the lesson not to do so. It's not that I want to impose pain and suffering on people, but like, I see it as a good thing if there is breakage and like people there's a lot of people who learned the lesson that dash dash harmony should not be relied upon. And that was really healthy for the ecosystem because people stopped relying on it as much. Similarly, like, I think that if there's breaking changes to non-experimental things, then that's something we may need to consider trying to get in by LTS. But we can break experimental modules in LTS anytime we want. It's experimental. And I think we should feel free and empowered to do that. And we should actually see when that is necessary, we should see that necessity as a good thing because it reminds everyone of the experimental nature of it. So I guess that I was hoping for clarity from Miles about like what are the non-experimentally flagged breaking changes that you think we need to get in by LTS, and are there any?
I think that what may be a good exercise is us coming up, and maybe this is a revisiting of the phases, but like coming up with the exact roadmap of what we want to ship, and that would underline that in my personal opinion. Guy, you have your hand up.
I think I was going to mention along those lines, and I won't distract. I know we're probably hitting time on this topic anyway, so I'll leave it at that.
We have 5 minutes.
I mean, just in terms of other features, since you say so, in terms of other features under the experimental flag, so for me, it would be quite important to still have a loader, some kind of loader hook, even under the experimental implementation, because right now, for example, you've got people experimenting with WASM, you've got people experimenting with things, and they can do it through the experimental loader, which we've reverted on the minimal implementation. And so if we ship modules without that, that's kind of a tricky one for me because it's like we're taking away all those use cases, and my project specifically, I've used these hooks and I want to be able to hook into the resolver and do this stuff. So it would be kind of a loss if the experimental implementation doesn't have a resolver hook. But yeah, that's just the point I wanted to make.
I think that's also necessary for like APMs or any of the instrumentation use cases, which I think were pretty major. So I think kind of like hearing what people are saying, and Daniel, thank you for taking notes on this because this will be the important notes to have. I think the things that we do not have consensus on right now that we need to figure out for shipping is explicitly like our interop story and how we're going to handle that. I think from a feature standpoint, and then file extension resolution is another one that we have from kind of the specifier stuff. That's one. That's the other one. From missing features, I think the two largest missing features that we have right now are loaders and VM. I know Gus has done a bunch of work on the VM modules in the past, but we haven't really had the bandwidth to re-explore that space. So I guess this is just a very pointed ask. Do we need to have VM modules re-implemented in order to replace the implementation inside of core right now? Would people block on that? Or is that an incremental change that we could add before on flag?
Can you repeat the question?
We have currently Node Core has a VM implementation for VM spinning up modules in a VM module. If we copied over the minimal kernel as it exists today, we would be losing that functionality. Is this a blocker to replacing the implementation? Or is this something that we could replace the implementation and iterate to add VM modules as their own line of work? Because currently it's phase 2. Gus, you've got your hand up?
There's been a bit of iteration on VM modules in core, just with regard to like a lot of other stuff we're doing with like speeding up node start times and, cleaning up bootstrapping and all that stuff. And I think it would be counterproductive to revert VM modules back to what is currently in the minimal implementation. I think they have use. They're a separate feature. I don't think if we were to put the minimal implementation in core, I think it would make more sense to like merge the two together instead of one clobbering the other.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Doesn't the minimal implementation have a VM implementation at the moment?
No, that was taken out as part of landing the minimal kernel.
I thought Jay Dalton merged it back in, or did that not happen?
didn't happen.
Oh, sorry, I misremembered.
Jan, you've got your hands up? Hand?
Yeah, so what I would say is that at least from what I remember, the VM source text module leaked a lot of things about how modules work and how loaders work and how loaders interact with modules. Because implicitly, it has to hook into the actual import system, which is different from source text and just the run script thing. So I see a real risk that keeping VM source text module in the minimal implementation means that we are restricting the design space a lot. So I would rather take it out unless we have a lot of cycles to actually make sure we get it right.
Jeffrey?
I was just going to say, adding to your list of required features, I think entry points, eval, standard in, extension list, but also just like the traditional node space file.extension. I think we need a unified way of handling all that. And I forgot to mention when we talked earlier about that, when I was saying like asking for someone to help with it, there's also a pull request that just adds that to our phases. So if we can find time to hopefully approve that too.
Okay. So kind of circling back on the VM thing, I guess like one question maybe to Brad. I know that Realms is something that's being worked on. I know that it's not something that's coming in the necessarily near future, but I don't see anyone implying that it will never land in the spec. Like it just needs to be done right.
Correct.
And Jan, speaking of that, could we arguably say, and I'm not saying that this is 100% accurate, that the truly perfect solution to this would be Realms to VM modules?
I can give a counterpoint. Realms are not letting you create arbitrary modules. You could not make a module in the main context for Node. Realms only let you instrument contexts created through the Realm API. And that's the big difference with VM module. They're not seeking to allow you to do that. Also, the APIs are very different from what you might expect given VM.
But from a capability standpoint, is the capabilities that we want to do with the VM module, can that be accomplished via Realms, or are these tangential?
I think largely, yes, they can be accomplished. There's one case, like I said, where you want to create a module in the main context that it would not satisfy.
Because you can't escape the realm.
Yes.
So, Jan, as a quick question to you, if we were to ship, for example, VM modules and ship them in like almost just like an explicitly deprecated state, almost like what we do today with zones, or not zones, with domains, under the assumption that realms would become the approved way of doing this, and over time we could deprecate them. Would that appease your concerns?
It really depends on, it would be a known unknown for me always, because whether that exact API will stop us from doing something in the realm space, or whether it will influence, like it will be always this weird escape hatch that works slightly different, and where there's kind of a ill-defined interop between how the realm stuff works and normal main module loader works, and then VM source text modules are their own little world that have a completely different semantics. So it just feels like launching it deprecated. I mean, sure, but I mean, the only thing that we really gain by that is maybe an eval as module, and that seems very narrow, especially because it's eval as a literal module, not as a REPL module where you can append stuff to. Like it seems very restricted in what it brings us capability-wise compared to the potential restrictions it puts on us design space-wise.
Okay, and then
unless
just
I'm missing important use case.
then a very quick question to you before I pass to Gus. Do you personally have the time to work on this between now and the time that we want to ship? Like, is this realistically something that you, as someone interested in it, have the time to put bandwidth into? Not to put you on the spot, but like, I'm just trying to be pragmatic about what we can accomplish.
Yeah, I think my primary concern would be, I don't think I would have enough time to make sure that there is an implementation that is guaranteed future proof, no matter what happens with realms or what happens with other parts of the module system. So I think the short answer is no.
Okay, so with that being said, we're really over time on this item. So Gus and Saleh, to add in your points, but please keep it short.
Okay, just a few quick clarifications. VM modules are behind their own experimental flags, so we can break those as much as we need to based on the design of our module loader system. We can, break them every single release if we need to, so don't feel constrained by them. And the other thing is that VM source module, the design has its own constraints, one of which was in fact running in the main context. We had a lot of, the design it has right now mostly came out of discussions with JS DOM, which has its own, things that it wants to do with this. So so I don't think that Realms can provide a complete replacement for the goals that VM has.
Okay. Splitting the difference there, though, it sounds like we could keep VM modules behind their own flag, separate from the flag for modules. Would people be okay with that as its own kind of branching thing, and to not allow VM modules themselves to block, but also not to necessarily remove them? Because if they're behind their own flag, in theory, we can also just remove them at any time in the future. It doesn't sound like a decision that needs to block our ability of replacing the implementation. Okay, I'll make a proposal based on this conversation and try to put together identifying, exactly the things we need to make decisions on, exactly what the implementation looks like. And then Saleh, you have your hand up. What was the last bit you wanted to add?
Yeah, so definitely, like I second what Gus said and what you said, and I just want to say that VM modules, at the very, very least, allow someone to, if we remove experimental modules, no matter what the use case is, I'm not making claims. If we remove that, with VM modules being very, very similar in the API of experimental modules, you could potentially create an experimental module loader that does that through the VM source text module, and that be separate from our implementation if you so please. That's it's a win to have that.
Okay, thank you, Saleh. So we have 10 minutes left because we went deep on all the things, and we have 2 items left. One is a 15-minute one on the IRP type dynamic modules, which I think is the most important bit. We also have the import file specifier proposal implementation. Jeff,
can I just clarify on those actually? The dynamic modules, one of those PRs is basically the first PR, or actually, so the IRP specifier proposal is, I think, the main item to, if we can address over the next 10 minutes. Yep. The dynamic modules one is basically the implementation of it with dynamic modules, which I will close now since we're basically haven't made progress on dynamic modules.
Well, I would hold off on closing it yet. Let's follow up afterwards on that, because perhaps we should still move forward assuming that we can make solutions in the next 2 months. But Jeff, did you have a quick, for the imports file specifier proposal that you can chime in on? And also, if anyone else can pick up on notes, that would be helpful.
This is the proposal we've been working on since November for allowing import statements to pull in main entry points of ESM packages and also of common.js packages. And it also creates this concept of package boundaries and package scope, so that if you put type ESM in a package.json, files in that folder and subfolders until the next package.json file are therefore treated as ESM if they're .js files. So because I think that this establishes a few things that loaders build on top of, or should probably build on top of, and that the entry point stuff will kind of also be building on top of. I was pushing to try to get this merged in sooner than later so that it unblocks that other work. And I understand the concern about
now, Jeffrey. You'd like to merge it now.
Yes, I understand the concern about the CJS interop. So if right now this only imports CommonJS default entry points. So I guess there's a question of if we want to allow that regardless of whatever happens with named exports for CJS. If we don't, we can, it can come back next meeting with that removed, or we could merge this now and then have another PR to remove it or throw a exception or something for it.
So if I can suggest something, we also have a massive conflict that I'm trying to fix on that branch, like on modules LKGR right now anyways. Just as a summary on this one, I would like to suggest that we don't push moving this right now because I think it should be re-reviewed with the context that we have, but perhaps we can try to land it out of band between meetings. Can we just have consensus that if by next Wednesday, a week from now, there's no objections on that PR, we can land it out of band from the meetings? Does anyone object to that?
What's the PR number?
It is PR 256.
Okay.
Oh, it's issue 256.
If anyone,
that has a link to the PR and the ECMAScript modules repo.
The behaviors are roughly in line with what was demoed at the previous meeting. There have been a few changes. One of the changes was changing to the type specifier in the package JSON. This is still something that can be changed. It's not, the final picture. We're still kind of, we're wanting to merge things in without necessarily saying that we've fully agreed on that case, but for now it's type asm in the package JSON.
If I could just make one other point too, is just in general for people, as we're trying to make these deadlines, it really helps to get feedback from people, earlier than like the morning of the meeting or the night before the meeting. I understand TC39 is happening and a lot of things happened really suddenly, just very recently, but it's hard to respond to feedback right before we're hoping to vote on things. So if in the future, when we present things for people, if you can try to get to it sooner than like at the meeting, so we have a chance to make fixes before the meeting and therefore not be like bumped to a following meeting, I would appreciate it.
Excellent. So no one seems to object to landing this next Wednesday if there's no objections on the PR and ECMAScript modules.
I just have a question about that. So what should we do about the import of CJS default?
Well,
should we keep it in or remove it or what?
Let's wait to see if someone objects to it.
Oh, okay. That's fine with me.
Okay, so Guy, sorry you only have 6 minutes, but IRP type dynamic modules, I guess we'll go to number 28, which is just the IRP type modules.
Yeah, so that's the PR that we're discussing, and the dynamic version was basically just the same PR, but with the full V8 patch, including dynamic modules implementation, and now at least it can kind of prove that it was possible for a moment. So.
Okay, can you give us? I guess so. This is all interconnected with itself. Then, can you give a high overview for everyone one more time about what the semantics are of this, and then perhaps what could be really helpful would be. Since we kind of need to look at two paths right now, maybe one path where we have dynamic modules and interop, and one path where we don't have dynamic modules and perhaps no interop, and perhaps a third path, which is no dynamic modules but default. How do you see those differences changing this proposal?
Right. So the first PR implements what I demoed, basically, with the type field in the package JSON. And CommonJS is just the default export. So you get the whole module.exports object snapshotted at the time of execution, and that's your default export. The dynamic modules variation of that PR adds in the V8 patch implementation of dynamic modules, builds a new version of module wrap around it, and basically implements dynamic modules in Node to provide named exports for CommonJS modules while maintaining the exact execution invariance of ES modules. And so that's what that PR does, and it shows the behaviors of how the named exports work out with that. And we get to replace the internal create dynamic module.js file that we have that kind of does a custom wrapper approach to do this kind of thing currently. So the semantics of dynamic modules, I mean, I don't want to dive too deep into that now. But yeah, basically, without a clear green light on dynamic modules, I don't think we should merge that because it would involve a sort of a V8 patch that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, will then be out of sync with V8 changes upstream. We're effectively forking V8 to some degree. So
I think that's fine for us to land on our fork, for what it's worth. I think that it's more like we shouldn't land that we shouldn't be upstreaming our implementation with that patch is more like where I would kind of land on it. So I think like if we are hedging on betting that in March we will be able to get something that will be palpable to people, and we want to move forward based on that assumption, I think it's actually fine to do that. The thing I'm actually more interested in is myself, and I will be very, clear. It's my time to be the bad guy. Sorry, but I am not sure that we should be shipping CommonJS interop support if we're only exporting the default. We could drag that out in a future meeting, but I would love to know, Guy, what are your thoughts about how this proposal exists in a world without interop? Is it still necessary? I know that Brad has feelings about still wanting it because it's a static way to determine from the package what kind of package it is and what the file extension should be. But do you think that this, yourself as the person pushing it, does this proposal still have value? Is it still necessary without interoperability?
It defines a lot of other behaviors. We're building out a spec. We're building out the way that the legacy mains get loaded. Well, the main entry point gets loaded in ESM. The file extension handling is built into it as well. So it's kind of building on top of that. I tend to think, like, I quite liked what you described at the beginning or earlier when you were talking about dynamic modules, and you said, well, we can go along this path, and then if it turns out not to be viable, we can revert it. And that's a very quick reversion. I quite like that suggestion because it allows us to go down this path and then at any point in future say, okay, this is not working. We all vote that it's not working. Let's strip out the parts that import CJS and strip out the package boundaries and all the rest. But we're still left with the other stuff that we've worked out. So we don't, that doesn't get wasted.
Mm-hmm. Like entry points or loaders or all the other things that we'll build on
top level flags.
Okay. We have 1 minute left. Jeff,
before we lose time, can I just ask for consensus that we can add to phase 2 that we're going to work on entry points? Does anyone object to that, or can I merge that into the roadmap doc?
No objection from me.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. I'll take the action item of trying to collect the notes from today and put together, I'll review both our phases doc and try to put together some sort of proposal about what it would look like for us to ship something, and we can discuss that in the next meeting and try to reach consensus around it. Even if we don't necessarily know what it is, I'm actually feeling the most confident. And yeah, it's kind of like, I know it